All right, so President Joe Biden recently came out and made some comments on Taiwan and the U.S. policy towards Taiwan while he was having a discussion with the Japanese Prime Minister. And so I wanted to discuss this because I think this is important for a number of different reasons. Obviously, as you can see here from the headline, Biden said that the U.S. would intervene militarily in Taiwan if necessary, basically meaning that in some way, one or another, and this is really the fundamental question here, the U.S. would come to the support militarily of Taiwan if China was to invade them in the coming years. Okay, so the important distinction here, obviously, is could this be a Ukraine-type situation where the United States would be funneling weapons into Ukraine and giving them intelligence and otherwise support, or would it mean that the U.S. is going to be directly militarily involved with U.S. troops should China decide to invade Taiwan? So let's get into some of the details here from this article, and then I'll try to put it a little bit more into context for you guys in terms of why the United States is so interested in Taiwan. So they say here from the LA Times, President Biden said Monday that the U.S. would intervene militarily in Taiwan if necessary, in an apparent shift away from the U.S. policy of strategic ambiguity that quickly ratcheted up tensions with China. So obviously this is important. This is just playing into the ongoing Cold War II electric boogaloo that the United States and our Defense Department has been waging with China in the recent years, basically. But essentially what they're saying here is that since Mao Zedong conducted the communist revolution in China and they successfully pushed back the nationalist forces to Taiwan, the United States has maintained this position of strategic ambiguity, which basically means we are off the books kind of recognizing Taiwan as an independent country, while rhetorically and in the geopolitical sense of the word, we are not officially recognizing them as a independent sovereign nation. We maintain our one China policy, meaning that we recognize that Beijing is the official government center of China, and that Taiwan has somewhat autonomy but is not fully part of China and is also not fully an independent country. So basically that's been the position, kind of vague but also intentional. Obviously that's why they call it strategic ambiguity. We're maintaining strategic vagueness in our position to China as to try to avoid a direct confrontation militarily with China. So that's why these kinds of comments are so important. But they continue saying the comment, not the first instance of Biden's blunt rhetoric on the world stage causing confusion and geopolitical uncertainty, suggested a willingness by the president to go further in defending Taiwan than he has in aiding Ukraine. And the Ukrainian government has received tens of billions of dollars in arms and intelligence assistance in the war launched by Russia, but not the direct intervention of U.S. or NATO troops. And they say, quote, "You didn't want to get involved in the Ukraine conflict militarily for obvious reasons," a reporter said to Biden during the president's joint news conference in Tokyo with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. And they said, "Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?" And he said, "Yes," responding, "That's the commitment that we made." But he said an invasion of the island by China was highly unlikely. And he said, "My expectation is that it's not going to happen. It will not be attempted." Now, it is kind of up in the air exactly what China's future policy towards Taiwan is going to be. If you go and listen to the words of Xi Jinping himself, he's saying he wants a peaceful reunification, but there is no doubt that China 100% considers Taiwan to be a part of their country. And so one way or another, whether that's through diplomacy or through military action, they definitely want Taiwan to be officially reincorporated fully into the Chinese government's control. So, again, not any indication that he's necessarily going to invade in the next coming months or weeks or even years, but if they were going to do it, and if there is no diplomatic avenue available to reunify as China sees fit, then you could have the potential for a dramatic escalation and, according to these remarks from Biden, a direct confrontation between the United States and the Chinese militaries. But they continue saying Biden made similar comments at a televised town hall in October, only to have the White House walk them back. And the U.S. has made a commitment to provide Taiwan the means to defend itself, just as there is no NATO obligation for the U.S. to defend Ukraine, has no treaty to defend it militarily. And before making the comments, Biden said U.S. policy towards Taiwan has not changed at all. That seems like kind of a contradiction there, because based on the rhetoric you were just deploying, seems like you kind of did make a shift in policy. But he says, quote, we agree with the one China policy," Biden said, referring to the longstanding position of recognizing the People's Republic of China as the country's sole legal government. But the idea that it can be taken by force is just not appropriate, and it will dislocate the entire region and be another action similar to what happened in Ukraine, and so it's a burden that is even stronger. And he also warned China against an invasion and said that it was important for the US and other nations to send a signal to Beijing by upholding the sanctions imposed on Russia after its invasion of Ukraine, basically trying to say, if you guys go in, militarily invade Taiwan, then you're going to similarly be isolated from the global community on an economic front. Now, the kind of difference between isolating Russia economically, which I think that there's fair debate and questions to be had in terms of the efficacy of our sanctions against Russia. I don't agree with any sanctions that are harming average Russian civilians who don't even necessarily support this war in the first place, but nonetheless, that has been the policy of the United States. But, Russia is a very different country geopolitically, economically, militarily than China is, and it would be significantly more difficult, if not outright impossible, for the United States and the West to isolate China economically should they invade Taiwan in the same way that we have done to Russia. That would not really be feasible in any way, shape, or form. I mean, we have massive imports and exports and trading with China. They're one of our biggest partners in the global economic community. So, it would be a significantly different situation on sanctions. So not really sure exactly how much weight that type of a threat would have to Beijing's internal calculations as to whether or not it's worth it to militarily involve themselves in Taiwan. But we continue here with a little bit more context in terms of the military confrontations that have been pretty tense, especially in recent years. So this is just from April of this year. China angered as U.S. sends destroyer through the Taiwan Strait. USS Samson conducted a monthly patrol of the strait, which the U.S. regards as international waters. So this has been very consistent. As you can see there, they say a monthly patrol. So the U.S. Navy is patrolling the strait that's right between Taiwan and mainland China. China also has been sending their planes into Taiwanese airspace. So, there is kind of these standoffs that have been happening over the last couple of years that have significantly escalated and are really only serving to bring us that much closer to a potential military confrontation between the U.S. and China. But there's a little bit of context on the military front, and we're going to circle back around to the strategic importance of why the United States and China both view Taiwan as so important to their national interests. But really, when it comes down to it, this unfortunately has nothing to do with the United States supporting freedom or democracy or, the people of Taiwan and having their best interests at heart. I wish that it did, but really, as usual, what this comes down to is disproportionately economic and military power. So I'm going to explain to you exactly what I mean by that. Here from the New York Times, they say how the computer chip shortage could incite a U.S. conflict with China. A war game and study by a think tank illustrate how dependent the world is on Taiwan's semiconductor foundries. So this is one of the main reasons why the United States and China and the rest of the global community place so much value on Taiwan as a economic importance for their national security interests. So there's kind of a two-pronged reason for this. Number one, because today, as they say here, 75% of production of these semiconductors takes place in East Asia, and 90% of the most advanced chips are made in Taiwan. 90% of the global most advanced semiconductors are made within Taiwan, specifically by this TSMC, I believe it's called, corporation, which is one of the largest corporations in the world that you probably never heard of, but they are extremely important. And again, they make up 90% of the most advanced chip production in the entire world. So both the United States and China rely on Taiwan for this semiconductor manufacturing. So obviously there's going to be it's going to be a big deal who exactly has disproportionate control or influence over Taiwan, whether it's China or whether it's the United States. Whichever country that ends up being, they are going to have a significant advantage in terms of importing a lot of the most advanced technology that are used on plenty of different things, whether it's consumer items, but also more importantly, how it underwrites our, as pointed out here by the diplomat, how it underwrites our military industrial complex. So this 90% production of the world's most advanced semiconductors, part of where those semiconductors are going is to maintain the United States advantage or edge that we have militarily as the world's global police force. So this is part of the reason why the United States sees Taiwan and their semiconductor industry as so vitally important, not just for our economic sector and investing in chips that could be used in computers or other various consumer products, but also because this is where we get the chips that go into our advanced aircraft and other military technologies that would be required to maintain our strategic military edge in the coming decades. So this is why, from the perspective of the military-industrial complex, that Taiwan would be so important. But there's another reason, which we're going to get to here on the strategic military importance, if there ever was going to be a military confrontation between the U.S. and China. But another important bit of context to this is, if you look at this situation where Taiwan is controlling 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors, well, your follow-up question might be, why don't we just invest in semiconductor manufacturing here in the United States? And that would be a good question, which the answer should be that we should be dramatically investing in semiconductor domestic manufacturing here, so that we aren't reliant on a country or a country like China or a place like Taiwan in order to be able to maintain the supply of semiconductors for many different reasons. But I talked about on this channel a couple different times breaking down this recent $52 billion investment in domestic semiconductor manufacturing, and unfortunately this is mostly just a corporate slush fund for billion-dollar corporations that have basically been entirely responsible for exporting our manufacturing capacity overseas to places like China and Taiwan. So they're giving a slush fund to corporations with almost no guardrails in place whatsoever, that they effectively and efficiently use this money to actually create good-paying union jobs domestically here in the United States. They basically passed a slush fund that not only is inadequate in and of itself, but also when compared to the investments that Taiwan is making in their advanced semiconductor industry. So, you can see here, we're investing $52 billion over, however many years to our semiconductor industry domestically, while TSMC, this Taiwanese manufacturing company, is single-handedly investing almost double that, or more than double that almost, of $100 billion over the next 3 years to meet chip demand. And their chips are going to be much more advanced than ours as well. Basically, by the time that a lot of these facilities domestically here in the United States get up and running, TSMC will have even more advanced semiconductors that they're producing. So really, this is inadequate in and of itself because there aren't real guardrails in place to make sure that this money is going into the right and best places. But it's also inadequate when compared to the global dominant producer of semiconductors that is investing much more than we are, and they're already ahead of us in terms of a technological edge on this front. So totally inadequate response here if you actually believed in reducing our reliance on foreign supply chains on semiconductors. But nonetheless, that's the measly steps that the Biden administration is deciding to take on domestic manufacturing. But another important piece of this that I said we were going to circle back around to is the military importance of Taiwan. So basically, the United States has maintained, almost since World War II, maintained strategic military dominance off the coast of China, specifically really more so after the Communist Revolution in the late 1940s and 50s. Basically, we've maintained what's called the First Island Chain, which encompasses, down here from the Philippines all the way up to Japan, and we have plenty of military bases that are stationed all around here. And basically, the idea is, you see Taiwan right here in the middle, and you can see in terms of both trading and both military importance why whoever controls this island is going to have a significant impact. If the United States has majority or disproportionate control over this island, then we could effectively form this chain and block them off if there was, or engage in an embargo of some sort if there ever was a military confrontation between the United States and China. But also from the perspective of China, if they have complete control over Taiwan, then they would be much more able to get their military vessels and continue their trading routes out through the East China Sea and to the rest of the global trading community. So those are the main reasons why this is such an important issue. Obviously, the United States wants to maintain our military dominance over the rest of the world. That's why we have, over 800 military bases stationed around the world. We have, tens of thousands of troops that are stationed in just Japan alone, right off the coast of China. So, this is really mostly about economic power in the sense of these advanced semiconductors that maintain our military dominance, and obviously also protecting the interests of the military industrial complex here in the United States. So at the end of the day, the solution to this is investing much more substantially in domestic manufacturing of semiconductors, and also pushing for diplomatic solutions instead of trying to aggressively ratchet up the rhetoric surrounding how the United States is willing to spark off World War III in the event that China should militarily involve themselves in Taiwan.